In a complex tale of perseverance and community resilience, the story of Titanfall 2 unfolds as a roller coaster of challenges and triumphs. The saga begins with the haunting presence of a mysterious figure known only as Jean Yu, a black hat hacker whose actions casted a dark shadow over the Titanfall gaming universe. Now, while the origins of Jean Yu and the figureheads that perpetuated his persona and widespread damage go far back, I want to try and surmise everything that led to the fall of Titanfall itself. And as the narrative unfolds, it becomes apparent that Jean Yu, shrouded in anonymity, executed a digital onslaught which almost single-handedly destroyed the entire Titanfall franchise, and even damaged a multi-billion-dollar gaming giant of Apex, but we'll get to that later. For now, we have to start at the beginning, namely with the creators of Respawn itself, Vince Campella and Jason West. These guys were originally the top developers for Infinity War, but this duo was fired for insubordination in 2010, with there being suspicion that the reasonings came from trying to retain creative control over the Modern Warfare franchise, without the input of Jason or West. Namely, after this event, they created their own company called Respawn and partnered with EA as a publisher. They then move on to try and bring a new experience to the modern FPS shooter industry with something that no one had seen before. So, in 2013, Titanfall was announced to the public. The game itself came off as a hit. The promotion toward the game blew up globally in almost every aspect, and the original duo itself perpetuated the love it had for the game. Initially, it launched as an Xbox exclusive in March of 2014, with a PC version that came soon after, and the game was showered in awards and love. But with the game selling around 7 million copies, the player base was quickly snuffed out, and the reason being is that the same year, GTA 5, Advanced Warfare, and even Destiny came out in that exact same time frame, all of which put the game in a difficult scenario where oftentimes in cases like these, the average gamer is positioned to choose which game has a stronger initial interest, where Titanfall was an original concept that didn't generate that feeling of security for some players. The game itself wasn't bad by any standard, but in some people's eyes it lacked a strong development and story, and had no campaign or fancy game additions that lacked needed gameplay aspects. In the devs' eyes, from the terrible release date timing and the general lack of additional content that made the game feel non-stop engaging, they went straight to working on the second release of Titanfall. And later on in 2016, Titanfall 2 was in fact released. Now, upon the game's debut, the original Titanfall fell off. Its player count essentially hit a brick wall, as players generally felt that with the improvements of the second game, there realistically was no reason to continue with the first one. And this was matched by the reaction of the developers themselves, but while it diminished, it didn't die. A small group of players that still loved the original game continued on with the sole purpose of enjoying the game. And this, my friends, is where our oh so lovely Jean Yu enters the scene. Now, for someone in his case, for whatever reason, he felt justified in using hacks, and with the sole goal of trying to ruin the experience of other players, you can see how this progresses. This one Jean Yu started off initially with the original Titanfall as someone who would only take part in the standard hacks you typically see in a AAA game, but as time moved on, this wasn't enough. He wanted to ruin the experience for everyone. But what followed from this was what became the spark of Jean Yu's unfathomable damage to the franchise. You see, Jean Yu, from this point, would move on from someone who hacked for the sake of his experience to someone who didn't want others to experience at all. He then began his work on what he coined as the atomic bomb, where he abused a fault within the Titanfall servers themselves, within the server's name-checking system. All he had to do was use a hacked account system by simply joining a lobby with other players in which the name of his joined player was an unfathomably long name that was so large it would log everyone out and crash the servers. Eventually, this did vast damage to the few left in the Titanfall community. The strange thing about this bot that he made was that it had to be done manually, meaning he would spend hours of his time, day by day, waiting until people started joining a match just so he could continue to join and ruin the game for them. Eventually, what remained of this damaged Titanfall community came together. They created a Discord group called Remnant, whose main focus was initially to find ways to get past this barrier that John Yu had created. And as the devs by this point would have done nothing to stop this, in response they worked to create their own hack for the game, where the few people who played the old Titanfall could come together in events and play, where the host would fill up the made lobbies with bots that would eventually be replaced by whitelisted players that only they allowed in. But this even wasn't enough to stop John Yu, as he then created a large series of bots that would then fill up every slot in every open Titanfall server, which were much more intricate and essentially prevented anyone from being able to play the game. This continued for over 3 years, and by this point now, the game was dead, officially. John Yu alone had ended Titanfall 1, and as to what was left of the remnants of that community, they were forced to move on to Titanfall 2. A game that had very fleshed out mechanics, a large community that many actively enjoyed, but with the group's switch to the newer game, such came the switch over of John Yu, someone who had a much bigger target to neutralize. From here, John Yu started his work on what he called the blacklist, a list built as a method of banning anyone he wanted by name at will. And with this hack, John Yu wouldn't just ban anyone. You see, John Yu wanted to be known. He didn't want what he was capable of to become unnoticed by the Titanfall 2 community, so he focused his efforts on targeting streamers, where he would then spam racist comments in their chats upon banning them. And by this point, John Yu's name was known. He had managed to take this program and make it work on anyone of his choosing. No matter the location, the IP, the account name, it didn't matter. From whatever knowledge he managed to acquire, John Yu seemingly had limitless power over the Titanfall 2 server's banning function, clearly indicating that he somehow got access to the game's infrastructure. And by targeting known streamers in the Titanfall 2 community, he succeeded in not only sharing his name, but degrading the populace of the community itself, spreading fear into those that may have otherwise considered buying the game, or even those who continued playing. And by ending the experience of streamers of the game, he was effectively cutting off larger fan bases that would have helped perpetuate Titanfall 2's chances of success. Now by this point, Titanfall 2, while not as popular as Apex Legends, had gotten the attention of Respawn. As news of John Yu's actions became public, it wasn't something that Respawn placed priority into, despite their public announcement saying they were looking into the problem. They ended up essentially doing nothing to circumnavigate the issue, as this game didn't take their highest degree of importance as Respawn's money-pumping pride and joy Apex Legends. But you see, John Yu, this wasn't enough for him. It wasn't going to cut it. Come months later, Respawn's announcement to try and fix the issues with Titanfall 2, a major exploit hack, was done on Apex Legends. On July 4th, 2021, the Apex servers were effectively taken down for multiple hours, with the message savetitanfall.com on the game's main menu screen, which is a website aimed at trying to shed light on all the things that had been going on with the previous Titanfall games. And on this very site, it takes you all the way back to the previous mentioned Remnants Discord, the group that had only come together with the purpose of trying to keep Titanfall alive, which was the complete opposite goal of everything that John Yu had done. So what I said before about this not being enough for John Yu, that understanding isn't quite so clear. So naturally, this hack becomes perfectly aligned with the Discord group's cause and their overall end goal. People assumed that the perpetrators of this attack were the Discord leaders, PO and Red Shield, as this hack directly linked to their Discord. And since everyone there was passionate about trying to save what was left of the Titanfall community, this was a perfect way to get Respawn to notice their cause. And for the most part, whoever initiated this attack effectively succeeded in their goal. The Remnants community got thousands of new members, and many media articles were written by news outlets covering both the hack and the events of Titanfall itself. But despite this, the leaders PO and Red Shield in every aspect denied these claims, stating that they were in fact not the ones who performed the attack, hinting that the real person who did this was some other hacker or even our named John Yu. And most actually came to believe them at the time, as they were well known in their communities, and in fact Red Shield himself was one of the leaders who helped organize the system all the way back in Titanfall 1 that allowed their originally small community to play the game when John Yu was using his atomic bomb exploit to prevent people from being able to play. So why wouldn't the real person who did this be John Yu, who might have used the link to the Discord to try and pin the blame on the community in hopes to cause further damage? All these things became suddenly very unclear, as it seemed the evidence lined up in some aspects, but at the same time it didn't root out the possibility that it wasn't John Yu at all. Then later on, the other leaders of the Remnant's Discord created a document that exposed everything, making the Remnant group appear to be the bad guys in this ordeal. The document, formerly named Project Red Tape, showed a vast amount of Discord screenshots that ultimately portrayed PO and Red Shield, as well as multiple other Discord leaders, actually to be the ones who did plan this attack to get more attention to the cause, and that they also pretended to be John Yu and try to kill the game and promote their own individual projects, with them giving the idea that John Yu was in fact PO, one of the Remnant's leaders. Eventually, another document came out called Cutting Through the Red Tape, that intended to clear up the lies of the original document, claiming that the real truth was that PO and Red Shield were not, in fact, the instigators of this attack, but that they knew the hackers who did this and were in direct contact with them throughout the entire process. So by this point, it had become a complete mess. People were just flat out confused. The understanding of what was true and wasn't could no longer be defined by lines. Everyone involved seemed to have mixed motives and understandings of what happened. But when it came down to it, we know that the Remnant leaders were in fact involved and did play a hand in the attack on the Apex servers. And even if they didn't perform the hack themselves, they had direct knowledge of the event and were in fact in contact with the real perpetrators. So the statements they made saying that the hackers were attempting to sabotage their group was a flat out lie. To summarize, we know that John Yu was the sole reason for ending Titanfall 1 and essentially killing off what was left of the small Titanfall 2 community. And we also know that the Remnant's group leaders did everything in their power to get the attention of Respawn. Whether or not they played a hand in directly causing and performing the actual attack on Apex, we can't know for sure. But they knew of what the hacker group was doing, and they were involved, but chose to stay quiet, while some things they said were blatantly untrue. Later on, the Titanfall 2 hack stopped, and Titanfall 1 was officially removed from the stores on March 1st of 2022. And while it remained for years despite being completely unplayable from John Yu's actions, and while few people today know of the real identity of John Yu, it may very well be that it was multiple people the whole time. For all we know, John Yu may have been fabricated from the very beginning as a tool to use in future plans for the hacks made on Respawn's future games, all the way back in Titanfall 1. Or maybe John Yu was originally hating on the Remnant community and after destroying the first game, decided to switch sides and help the group by hacking Titanfall 2 to get the attention of Respawn. And when it failed, he helped perform the hack on Apex, Respawn's pride and joy. But regardless of what is true and what isn't true, the motives are too mixed to truly know for sure. And I don't think we will ever know for sure. And in my opinion, all this didn't stem from John Yu at all, or even the Remnant's community, but from Respawn itself. While yes, both the former are to blame for the problems that happened, the real reasons that those problems stayed was inherently Respawn's fault. Their lack of care toward the games that they built is the main reason for why these stayed at all and as long as they did. And when it came down to who decided whether or not they should care, it's the majority of public opinion and money. Maybe if Titanfall 2 had managed to become popular enough, Respawn wouldn't have left it in the dust. Maybe if John Yu stopped his damage completely after he killed the first game, the community might have lasted longer and maybe become popular. But at the end of the day, it's Respawn's game. They could have put in the time to fix the issues of both games, but simply chose not to. And while the determining factors are the vast majority and the money, why should they care when their $2 billion game, Apex Legends alone, brings in hundreds of millions of dollars from microtransactions alone every year? Why should they help revive a dying community? Which is why I think inherently in a world where What you place your attention on is the determining factor of whether or not something succeeds. It's the job of community leaders to try and do your best to share attention to the things that often get overlooked. And in some ways, what PO and Red Shield wanted was just that. But in their case, I think that need to make something work turned into a feeling that would make them stop at nothing to achieve their goal. Whether they had to single-handedly threaten a multi-billion-dollar gaming industry or not. As of now, things are actually looking up. Recently, Respawn dropped a sudden Titanfall 2 update, which gave a ton of hints toward there being a Titanfall 3. And many players are actually hoping that this means there's a good chance of it. With the history of Respawn being so cutthroat and money-oriented, people have had a hard time believing that they just updated the game to be nice. Titanfall 2 as of now holds around about 2,000 to 4,000 concurrent player average. And personally, I love Titanfall 2 ever since I was a kid. I remember getting that game on Xbox and playing for 24 hours a day, and even now I still pop in and play the game in my little free time. But it just has an immersive story, a solid gameplay loop, and it gives me a great feeling every time I come back. And who could forget that infamous NPC line where they're saying they're trying to corner us, every single 10 seconds? Honestly, it's just kind of a meme at this point, I'm not gonna lie. But, if you want to check this game out, like always, the links are in the description, and have a beautiful rest of your day, boys. Peace.